All right. Hello, YouTube. Today I'm really excited to introduce to you my friend Jay Dimatello. Jay Dimatello has one of the most dreamy career paths in design, and he has worked at some of the biggest names in tech, including Yahoo, Pinterest, Twitter, Google Ventures, and most recently, he is leading design at Grab. Yeah, welcome to the show, Jay.
Hey, how you doing? Good morning from Singapore, by the way.
Yeah, good morning. It's the afternoon for me. So, Jay, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the stories of your design career?
Yeah, so I actually never wanted to be a designer when I first was, in college. I actually wanted to be a history teacher, which is sort of funny
What?
to
I did
me.
not know this story.
Yeah. And then like I actually switched majors. I was like, I want to be a creative writer. I actually want to write like novels, poetry. Actually, like there's like all these poems I wrote like back in like my uni days are actually online somewhere. I don't know where they are. I'm sure someone will
Oh,
find them and blackmail me eventually, but it's fine. They're really bad. But I really wanted to be a writer. And then I guess I was like, no, maybe I want to be a new media person and work on robots. So I switched my major again. So I switched my major three times. And then I was taking a web design class, I think, was it freshman? Oh, well, maybe like sophomore year. And I was like, the guy in my web design class is like, what are you doing in this class? You should be a designer. Because he saw like the web design I was doing and he was like very confused. He's like, you seem like you have a talent for like designing things. And he's like, you should apply for the conservatory, which is the design conservatory, right? So I ended up applying and I got in. I actually ended up using all my old artwork that I did in high school, and then I took some art courses because, of course, I was still into art in the university, and I got in, which I was really surprised about. Actually, I was I was not foreseeing myself becoming a designer, so that was cool. And I think there was one night where I actually visited my neighbor, and my neighbor was actually majoring in design, and this is before I applied, and she was like putting together her portfolio before she was graduating, and I was like, oh wow, these posters are beautiful, and like I was just nerding out with her about like the art and the type that she was using, and I didn't know like these things were terms or at this point, right? And this was like around 2008 2009. So I was like really into it, and I didn't know that was like design. And then when I applied, it was pretty much inspired by her in general. When her talking to her, and then also that guy that told me like I should just apply for the conservatory, and I did. I got in, and I was super stoked. And I guess that was my journey from there, my design journey. And to be honest, like everyone talks about design school being like a learning process. Dude, I messed up so many times in design school. I didn't think I was gonna make it out of the conservatory by like second year. I was like, I want to get out of here. I want to transfer to a better design school. They don't know they don't know what they're missing out on. Like I got so sick of the professors because they were so hard on us. And then I got through. I graduated, and it was funny because back then I think we were going through a recession. So my first internship was actually as an animation designer. And mind you, I never had any experience doing animation design. And the art director or head of design or whatever took me under his wing. He's like, I'll teach you. You'll be an intern, and I ended up doing animation graphics. And after I graduated, that was my internship that turned into a full-time job. And that was back in New York City, and that was like really stressful because I'm not sure if you've ever done animations before. It's super stressful, and the animations for live television. So to give you context, right, for like deadlines, let's say they give you a project at like 3 p.m. They want it by 9 a.m. the next day. So sometimes you have to get the work done before like end of day, and then you'd have to record your animation design because live television is still about like videotapes back then. So we had to record it and then send it to I guess like the headquarters or wherever it's going to be played, right? And then sometimes there'll be a change right before 9 a.m. They're like, hey, you have to come to the office at 7 a.m. and make changes. And that was super stressful. So and that turned into a full-time freelance gig. Actually, I was actually doing that for a while, and it's probably the thing that was like good for me to be honest, because it was a very painful learning experience. Is the fact that I got to learn more about deadlines and more about like managing like stakeholders and like just the working world. Because when you graduate, you don't know any better, right? You just think, oh, I'm going to be the best designer in the world. I'm going to take over the world, design such a cool industry. And then you're just like, oh, wow, this is what the real world looks like, right? And you're just like, oh, man, this is what it looks like when you're handling like managing like stakeholders or like from the CEO, getting feedback from them. It's painful. So to be honest, I was blessed to like actually have gone through that. And then I ended up in San Francisco. Um, and I mean, yeah, I worked at a few cool startups, but I think I got lucky, very lucky in terms of like learning about design at a time when I think the iPad had just come out. everyone was still doing responsive design, right? And everyone was like just trying to figure out how to scale like your website to like iPad to iPhone. And all of Silicon Valley was pretty much learning together. They're like no YouTube, what do you call it? YouTube Academy or LinkedIn Academy. There was like nothing like that, right? So we all learned together. Like that was the first time I worked with an engineer. I was at a startup, oh no, agency. I was at an agency, and I worked closely with the developer, and we learned together like how to do that, how to scale like a website to iPad, iPhone. And then we started working on apps, and that's when like I think the Apple Store started opening up to everybody. I think Android had just come out as well with their own I guess like Google Play Store or whatever. Oh, I think Play Store came out later, but it was just a fascinating time in general, like where everyone's just learning. So I got lucky, and I was in that wave of like learning everything when iPad, and then I think the Android phone came out like maybe a year later. So it was a cool time, and then I got lucky. I ended up at all these agency startups that were also evolving in that realm of like mobile design. So I was never really I don't have the human certificate license or whatever you call it nowadays, HCI. I don't have the product design certificate either. I just learned by doing. And now, like after like 8 years, I actually went to China for a bit to educate people on visual and product design. And now I'm in Singapore leading the safety team now. Like I was originally on Grab Food, and if people don't know what Grab is, it's like the Uber equivalent in Southeast Asia. But we do everything from food deliveries like Uber, but we have payments. We got what else? We do Mart, so that's something like Instacart, right, in America, and a bunch of other things. It's nuts. So yeah, I came here when we actually turned into a super app, which is rare. And Ren, as you know, you're from China. Like WeChat is like the pretty much the original super app. So I guess for me to actually come to Grab when we actually turned into a super app, and I was in that transition phase, it was crazy. Like I've never seen or been part of a team like that before, where we transitioned from like a singular app to like this super app that does like many things. So I guess I've seen a lot of different ways to see like product scale. So that's pretty much my journey.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I actually have a lot questions around that. We'll wait for later because I I think I've been in the US for over a decade now, and you're probably more familiar about my own country now. I don't use WeChat a lot, and yeah, do you mind give people maybe they're not as familiar about Asian and tech in
Yeah,
Asia?
sure,
What
sure.
is a super app?
Yeah, so a super app is pretty much you don't need to download any other apps. I think WeChat's like the greatest example. And if you don't know what WeChat is, I would check it out. The company that developed WeChat is Tencent, and Tencent does a bunch of things now. But WeChat was pretty much I guess, the original super app where you can not only chat to people, you can manage your banks, you can put your credit cards on there, you can pay with QR codes at any market. Like pretty much in China, as you know, like they most places don't take cash. They just rely on WeChat, which is a phenomenon that's I think America is still trying to do right now. I think it's just because the tech companies there are tightly regulated by the government, as most people are reading about recently, right? But WeChat is just very direct, well, easily regulated, but also connected to all these different programs that you can download on the app. You don't need to download any other applications. You can just download it. They call them mini programs, right? You can download, let's say, Baidu, which is like the Google of China, right? Baidu Maps on WeChat, and you don't have to leave the app. You just have the mini program run and just like direct where you need to go. You can call it Didi, which is the China equivalent of Uber, also on WeChat. You don't need to download the Didi app either. And it's all connected to your one app, which is it's nuts. And then on top of that, right, it's got this very similar Instagram story feature where you can share photos, you can throw filters on them. I think they started adding like stories recently. And now you can watch other stories from other influencers, I guess, on Tencent through WeChat memories and whatnot. And you can share other like news articles. Obviously, most of it is in Mandarin right now. But I think if anyone has seen or used WeChat, it's pretty powerful. It's pretty much a daily habit. And I think that's the biggest thing that China's got going for them. And I think one thing I do want to mention is the fact that downloading apps takes so much memory on your phone, right? The fact that you have to download so many apps in America versus like one app, let's say in Asia, people do take that seriously with, especially with like data on their mobile devices, and also how much data is actually on your phone in terms of applications, right? So the fact they think about that is very, I call it cultural, because it's like this weird collectivism that's almost shown through their applications and technology, where one app can do everything and watch out for you, versus like, let's say America in the West, where it's like very individualistic. where there's like singular apps that do everything for you, but they just live on their own, right? Yeah, and it's very interesting because you're starting to see Facebook try to do something very similar in terms of strategy of like how to connect all these apps here. And you saw that with Instagram and WhatsApp with all these things that are happening. I think you're going to start seeing more connectivity with probably payments eventually, because I think that's where the world's going, to be honest, in terms of just ease of payment. And I think everyone's actually adopting the same nature of like where Asian apps are going, because it makes sense at the end of the day, to be honest. And you're going to start seeing super apps for probably everything, whether it's like security stuff, like let's say like ExpressVPN, maybe like a super app like maybe for PayPal where it does all fintech stuff where you can buy stocks. I mean, I think they've been talking about that right now, where you can download, invest in stocks, invest in crypto. So you're going to start seeing all these like variations of a super app, but that's pretty much what a super app is.
Yeah, that is crazy. So, how much has Grab scaled up to? Is Grab as big as WeChat?
I mean, it is, but in Southeast Asia, it is pretty big. I mean, we have amazing competitors, to be honest. And I think for me, like, I think it's great to see there are other competitors that are also doing it. I think, and not a lot of people are familiar with them. Like Gojek's a very strong competitor in Southeast Asia that has an amazing app as well. That's a super app. I think Shopee is also another one that's also trying to be a super app as well. I think everyone's trying to go in that route. I think the thing with super apps is, you guys, it's very difficult to connect everything together. And I think one thing that, the one things that could improve in general for all super apps is that connection with the user. I think WeChat just does such an awesome job in general, connecting chat with merchants with the mini programs. I'm not sure if you remember, right? Like when you use like the mini programs, let's say like there's a Starbucks in China, right? And the Starbucks will connect with you after you pay with WeChat. They'll connect with you. They'll send you a message. They'll send you promotions, right? They'll encourage you to sign up for a membership through chat, and then they'll tell you deals that are happening as well. And then they'll just keep pinging you, but like it's not annoying, right? For someone that uses WeChat all the time and probably goes to Starbucks, the fact that it's communicating with you through probably an AI or a bot, and probably reading your daily habits, right? It's so helpful in general, and it's so easy to pay with that you don't even think about it. It just becomes like a normal thing for you. So I feel like it's that communication with merchants probably is a big difference, and the communication with the other mini programs on WeChat that not a lot of super apps have figured out yet. And I think that's one thing that will probably evolve in the probably upcoming years. But I think that's one thing that is fascinating that WeChat does, is that communication part's so easy. And let's say you do the food delivery order on WeChat, right? They call you through WeChat. It's not like through a separate app. So and they message you on WeChat as well. So there's something nice about that, right? You don't have to like use this like anonymous number calling me on DoorDash, right? That's annoying. You don't want this random person calling you, and then on WeChat it tells you who's exactly calling you, and there's something nice about that.
Yeah, wow. Sounds very interesting. Sounds like a growth designer's heaven. There's all these data you can plot. I'm thinking it would be super interesting to see a user journey across different platform and
Yeah.
different usage. Yeah, I have to say I do not use I'm sorry, I do not use WeChat or mini apps, and I only use it for the chatting purpose with my
I think it's a
family.
generational thing, right? Because I feel like all
Yeah.
the younger people know like all these little things, and we're like, what? How do you can do that? How do you do that on WeChat? Because my mind's still blown, just as like you. I'm like, really? You can still do that on WeChat? Like, yeah, same.
Yeah. Yeah, what about like your actual design role at Grab? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I've been on two teams at Grab. So I was on Grab Food. Like I said, it's the Uber Eats equivalent, pretty much. And I got here, say, 2017. And for context, um, pretty much I was the only designer on food on consumer side, the
Wow.
first designer. I did have a manager at that point. And then we had like one designer for deliveries, which are the drivers, right? And then we had one designer for merchant, and which are restaurants. So we didn't even have a product owner or business owner at that point, which is crazy, right? And then Grab decided they wanted to invest and put more effort into it. And then pretty much I was part of that scaling of the team and the growth of the team in the beginning. And that hyper growth was insane. Like in the span of like, I guess, 6 months to 8 months, we ended up like shipping like an updated redesign of the food experience. And that was probably the most intense time I've ever been through. And mind you, also, like there are multiple meetings, there are multiple sync ups, and my engineering team was also in Beijing.
Oh,
So
wow.
I had to also go to Beijing as well. which was, to be honest, I think that was awesome because I had never worked with a foreign. Actually, I have worked with a foreign team before, but I had never traveled to like an international office before, and just working with them was awesome. Obviously, like I had been in China beforehand, so I knew some things, and I had like WeChat as well, so I was set up for success. And I knew some Mandarin, which helped. And it was so funny because like I love my developers in Beijing. They're so funny. They just taught me all the cultural nuances of, it's very different working style in China, as you know, right? Versus like Singapore. And most people will assume that it's a monolith in terms of culture and just working. It's not. It's very different when you work with developers, let's say in Southeast Asia versus like Silicon Valley versus China. It's very different in working styles and how you communicate things. And I think the process when I first got to Grab, that was the original question, right? Was the fact that I had to scale like not only my designs, but also think about how to scale my process to different cultures, different ways to communicate to others. Because I was the only designer at that point. I didn't know better. I mean, I was just learning on the job. So to be honest, my process evolved. It never like one way that I thought would work wouldn't work because maybe it worked in Silicon Valley, but it didn't work out here, right? You're managing different people and processes, and the fact that it felt like a startup from the team I was on, and then it ended up growing into like this large, gigantic like Southeast Asian span of like 2 3 years, which is nuts. That's incredible growth, by the way. Like, and we tried so many things, a lot of experiments. And I think one thing I think is at the core of all of this is just how design brings value and how you communicate it to people in general, right? And the one way to do that is just through explaining it through business terms. And not a lot of designers like thinking like a business person, but in reality, right? Like, you're not going to communicate to like a business or CEO stakeholder by saying this looks nice, this experience looks great, just because there's a nice carousel and has micro interactions. That's not going to fly. If you're going to communicate it, if any, just use data metrics, obviously, and you can get that from your product analytics team members, or you can also look at the metrics. So, example, and this is how like fake numbers I'm coming up with, right? So let's say you want this person to check out on the order flow when they're, let's say, on Uber, right, or Uber Eats. They're about to check out, and maybe it takes them, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes to check out, and it takes them maybe 3 taps. And that right now, the current revenue that they're generating is maybe 20% through that experience. Let's say you improve that experience and you only make it now 2 taps. It takes them 2 minutes, and the revenue on an A/B test now goes up by 5%. That may seem like a little, and as you know, since you're a growth designer, that's a lot. That 5% matters so much that it actually you start evolving the design based off all these A/B tests, based off the little things, the little wins, right? And that's how you pretty much win people over. You got to bring up those metrics, the business part of things, because if you don't, then you're not communicating the way that most people are communicating. Like, and that's the problem I see with a lot of designers. They don't want to learn how to communicate like how businesses grow. And to be honest, like that's how design brings impact and value to a company. If you can communicate and also like share that this is going to bring and generate revenue for gross monthly value, GMV, and all these terms that we hate hearing. But in general, like that's what gets people behind your design, right? And yeah, it's a little bit politicky, but in the end, right, you need all those relationships, and those relationships count because people start trusting you more, and they start trusting your design taste and critiques on things, right? So that's one thing for me in my process that's evolved over time, and that's how I pretty much communicate to stakeholders nowadays.
Yeah, I know there's a trend like that in the Silicon Valley as well. Designers are more and more emphasized on the business, communicating the business value with their design, and then there's of course the emerging of the growth design field.
Yeah.
So I think they're going similar directions. So you mentioned you do a lot of A/B testing, and then you use the data to inform your design. Um, is that common in Asia?
Very different processes, I think. I
Is
think
it?
I mean, okay, it really depends on your team, right? I think food, we ran A/B tests. I'm currently now on the safety side, so and everyone's like, "What's safety? Like, what do you do on safety?" So I'll get back to your question, but let me give some context on what I do on
Of
safety.
course.
So safety, pretty much, we like, let's say you're riding in a car, and let's say there's an incident, whether it's with the driver or there's an accident, and you have to call an emergency assistance, right? That's what safety is. Or assume that everyone will assume that's what safety is. Yes, that's part of it, but there's so many facets to safety, right? There are for my team in general, and the overall what my team is. So my overall team's like trust, identity, safety, and security. So there are parts of safety that deal with, like, let's say authorization and verification when you log in. So fingerprint, logging in, right? PIN recognition, how they log into the platform through Grab through different services. For me, I deal with facial recognition, which is interesting. I deal with telematics. If no one knows what telematics is, we pretty much track, the behaviors of someone driving, whether they're speeding, cornering, braking, all these different things. And then a bunch of things that I really can't talk about, but pretty much that's what safety does. There's a bunch of other things that also happen that is pretty much confidential, but that's pretty much in general what I'm working on right now. And back to your question in terms of A/B tests. So it depends on the team. I think we ran way more A/B tests on the food team because obviously it's with consumers, right? I think it's more trickier and more sensitive if you're on the safety side for sure, because you don't want to upset the balance of, someone needs an emergency. You don't want to really A/B test anything on that side. But in terms of culture and processes is very different. Let's say, the West is very incremental improvements at A/B tests and experiments. Yes, we run experiments out here for sure, but I think there is definitely, again, it depends on the team or culture, that there is this willingness to just ship it and see what happens and then get feedback, especially business impact, right? And that's and we call that China speed because China does that a lot with their applications. And, it's very true for most of the startups or larger tech companies where they just ship it and see what happens, right? And I think there are, pros and cons to each process per se, but it is just fascinating to see like what works and what doesn't work for each culture. And to be honest, I think it's not a cultural thing. I think it's a company thing because I know Basecamp does that as well, where they just ship things and see what happens. So for my team, I think experiments are done more. I think we're now in a world of like doing more user research because I think you need to get context of people's behaviors, especially in like situations like safety. I think one example I've been working on recently is just like putting myself in the driver's seat and understanding like what distracts them while they're doing deliveries or driving. So, I did a bunch of scenarios where we put together where we just wanted to understand how a driver like pretty much is distracted just by looking at the phone, being directed by a map, and just understanding like daily concepts of that. And if it goes anywhere, I'm not sure where it'll go, but I think it's just better for anyone to understand how a driver reacts to these things, right? And at the end of the day, you're just trying to learn about the user, right? And that's what you should be doing. You should be servicing these as your users in any way you can. And if it's putting yourself in a position of understanding like what their pain points are, then do it. Like there's this resistance for some reason to not do that. And I think we really need to really like put ourselves through what our users are going through. I think onboarding, as most people know, like onboarding is like painful because you want to like get people to sign up, right, and just go through the whole experience. But sometimes you lose that user because they don't want to deal with the time spent just reading. And some people don't even read nowadays, right? Mm-hmm. So there are different ways to really understand, the physical output of like the experiences of a person versus like, someone that's just hanging out at home on the phone, just trying to onboard and sign up. So I think that process of really understanding your users is so important, not just through like A/B testing experiments, but definitely research is a big part of it too.
Right. Why do you think some companies have more resistance to user research?
Oh, dude. I mean, I know certain companies that do out here, and I think they're eventually going to learn that user research is so valuable because you can only do so much to increment your business to a point where you're like, okay, who are you actually servicing? Because like you're not going to get context of like, let's say, someone on the street in maybe Bangkok or Saigon in Vietnam. You're not going to understand like their daily habit. You're just going to assume that that they're just money to you, right? Like business, yes, of course, like your users will, partake in your experience and order stuff, but how are you going to make them feel like you listen to them? How are you going to make them feel like you're actually, catering to their needs? Yes, like every country is very different, right? But you need to localize. And I think we're going to a hyper localized world, to be honest, especially with what we're seeing right now, where how we're catering to certain groups, right? So I think, that's the thing I like about Grab, that they hyper localize for the experience in like, let's say Indonesia versus Singapore. An example of that, right? Indonesia is very, very populated Muslim country. And so we have to be, and I'm speaking from like food terms, right? So we have to be very courteous of like the halal standard. So like halal may be the first category that shows up on the food app versus like, let's say Singapore, that is like maybe orders like a lot of localized food. So maybe Singapore restaurants may be a category you may see in food. So these are two things that you need to consider. Like you can't just like just what do you say, ignore those changes or ignore those differences. Sorry, ignore those differences in general between two different countries. You need to understand that. And I think one thing that is very different from like maybe America from here. Is like you do need to work with the governments and regulations a little bit more, and sometimes you have to put that language that we hate putting in as designers because it ruins the whole layout. But at the end of the day, right, you don't the governments have more of a, I wouldn't say, but more of a impact on what you're going to have to do in terms of features, right? And it's going to be very different. So another example is like alcohol. So you're not going to serve alcohol in a predominantly Muslim country. They're not going to allow it. Versus like, let's say Vietnam, where the person has to show their ID and they have to be verified through maybe a photo on the ID, right? It's going to be a very different experience in terms of like what's going to be shown. So it's little things like that you need to understand the cultural nuances with working in experiences, but also working with governments.
Yeah, that sounds very different.
It's very
Do you,
different.
yeah, do you go to each country for research?
Pre-COVID, yes. I
Oh,
spent
yeah,
most of my time in Indonesia for a
of
while
course.
because that was such a big, it's a big region and it's such a large population that there's so many differences in Indonesia. I mean, I'm Filipino by blood, but I've been to Vietnam. I've been to all the countries. I mean, even before grad, I was like backpacking for a while, but like the nuances is very interesting. And one thing I also want to point out is like content is so different as well. Like, the assumption that content can be overlooked is like, there's this assumption that everyone will understand English slang, or like when you translate it in Google Translate, it's gonna read the same way. People pay attention to that stuff out here. You can't just write anything down from Google Translate. So I think one thing I've learned ever since being out here is content is like king. And you need those localization content specialists in these different countries because people are going to be more understanding of, let's say, reading the content. I think I had one situation where it was I forget which country it was, where checkout meant completely different a term in like, let's say, a different language, right? So we actually had to have like a content localization specialist change it. And then it was during user research, by the way. So after we changed it, the next 6 participants that came in the next day were like, oh, wow, this feels a lot more warm. It doesn't feel robotic. It feels like it can speak just like me. And I was just like, oh, wow, that's interesting, right? That difference in how people read and understand and like actually feel like the application is speaking to them and understanding them and in a way that the application didn't before is like fascinating. So to see that and also learn that, it was just like, for me, it just opened my eyes in terms of like how important it is that content and also the cultural differences for each country is going to be very different.
Yeah, fascinating. So we talk a lot about the cultural difference and the work apparently is very different you do in the West as a designer
Yeah.
versus the work you do. So did you notice any like difference in terms of working style?
Yeah. I think, it really depends on your perspective, I guess. And to be honest, I feel like I've definitely chilled out a little bit because the radical candor stuff doesn't work out here. And I've been humbled a lot by that because I think, in the West, as you know, everyone's like, oh, say it like you mean it. You gotta be like, out there assertive. And as you know, right, that doesn't fly out here.
Why
And
do
that's
you say that?
yeah, it's because it's about, I think everyone's trying to practice it a little bit more, I think on teams, right, where you try to empower each other. But I think everyone, from my perspective, ever since I worked in Silicon Valley, I think everyone's very assertive out there. And I think I'll put it in nicer terms. I think, because I don't want to get too deep. I think there's some privilege that goes with speaking up in America, quote unquote privilege. And then versus out here where you just have to be very courteous and how you say things. And I think I'm still learning that in general in terms of how to communicate with other stakeholders, um, other people around me. And I think that's so important to understand and figure out. And I think it's more about creating relationships out here. Yes, you can create relationships out in the West, but I think it's a little bit different. There's this, and I think most people probably see it in the movies. I'm not going to say it's true or not, but I think there's a lot more stakeholder management / building that you need to do out here. I remember before I came to Grab that I was in China when I was teaching design, that I went out with a lot of the university deans and the head of the programs, and you could see they were doing deals at the dinner table, right? And that's a very Asian thing to do, as you know, right? And you see that in movies, you see that in context, right? But it does happen. It happens in Japan, business meetings. It happens in Korea as well. And I'm not generalizing it. It does happen. And it's fascinating to see that. And I'm not saying that I had to do that at Grab, but you need to do something like that. You need to create those relationships with others instead of just being this individualistic person of privilege. And you just need to really think about the whole collective of your team and the emotions that are in there as well that go with it. So I think that's probably the differences that I've seen in myself in general coming from America.
Yeah, do you have any examples that you can share? Maybe some of the initial blunder that you've made?
I just don't want to get in trouble, but uh, I think it's just being too blunt, right? You can't be too blunt, right? Me and you, like we're blunt with each other in a funny way because we're friends. But I remember, like culturally, right? It's such a funny thing when you meet people from different cultures because sarcasm, as you know, can't be told, right? You can't read sarcasm. And whenever I'm sarcastic out here, it comes off like people don't get it or um, people don't understand, right? Versus like let's say if I'm sarcastic in America, people will get it. So I think that's like maybe one example I can say without getting in trouble. So
Yeah, that makes sense. It took me a long time to get used to this
yeah, yeah,
sarcasm for sure. In my first few years, I asked a lot about a lot of really to people just to double check if I'm getting
yeah,
it or
yeah.
not. Definitely resonate with that. Um, yeah, so we talked so much about designing and tech in Asia, and it seems like you're extremely passionate about the market. What is your outlook for the
Oh
tech
man, yo,
industry
it's Asia's time to
in
shine,
Asia?
baby. I think it's a great time to be out here. I think everyone's reading too much into the headlines with what China's doing to tech. To be honest, I think all these regulations are happening for a reason. And to be honest, I think the more interesting problems are happening out here. And I think people should start looking into other, maybe reading up on tech ecosystems in general, because I think everyone's too fascinated with the West. Because to be honest, I think there are some cool startups out there. You work at one of them, obviously. Like Webflow is pretty cool. I'm not gonna lie, no code's a thing, right? But the fact that we're now going into the realm of like ed tech, health tech is becoming more of a thing, obviously with the pandemic. Blockchains are becoming a thing as well. I think there's a lot of fascinating things that are happening in Southeast Asia specifically, especially when you're dealing with different ways of learning, different ways of communicating that learning as well. And I think that's the thing that's been archaic about America. The fact that the banking system hasn't been revamped yet. I know people are trying, but ed tech education is so bad right now. The system's pretty bad and old in America. People are actually trying this out here in Southeast Asia. So example, right? The fact that we're getting like villages and tier 3, tier 4 cities to sign up for payments is a challenge in itself. But these people are now like who may be tech illiterate. We're trying to onboard these people. This is just an example. It's not just Grab, but like everyone else. How do you get these users? Also, I mean, China's also trying to do it as well. Like, how do you onboard these users and educate them to use a super app or possibly use online banking, where they had to drive maybe miles just to sign up for a bank, right? That's fascinating. How do you do that? And another example that's semi-related, right? In Africa, they set up like these like how you call it, like almost like toll booths, but they're not. They're like banking booths where you can actually talk to the person, save money with the person, and you can also come back and withdraw, which is fascinating, right? And they're not connected to a bank. They're just like these trusted sources from a village that people are like just recommending you, like, hey, this person's a trusted source of income or like banking, right? You trust this person with savings and you can withdraw from this person. And it's the same in Indonesia as well. Like they have these things that they call arisans. In India, they call them kiddie parties, where the small town gets together. It's usually wives, but husbands also can come, and people put down money. Let's say like you put down $50, and I'm like, oh, I'll challenge you. I'll put down $100, and then one person collects all the money, and they actually act as a bank, and it's a fun like way to save money. And I think we're trying to get some of these communities now into the ecosystem of banking, right, and saving. So how do you do that? How do you do that and break into like these little daily habits with these communities? And that's fascinating. I don't think America has figured that out yet, because there's still regions, right, in America that are uneducated. They don't know anything about finance, and the financial literacy. So when you deal with tech literacy and then finance literacy in Southeast Asia, you're going to come up with some crazy experiences, right? And I think that's why it's so fascinating. And then the emergence of crypto, the emergence of like NFTs is just also awesome. In the Philippines, right, there is a town that uses this game to make money. It's called Axie Infinity, where they play the game and they make Bitcoin, or I think, yeah, they make Bitcoin, and they can pretty much convert it to pesos, which is Filipino, like the Filipino currency, which is fascinating. Like the fact that you can use the blockchain to make money off a game that's based in crypto, and it's not like Manila, which is the capital city. It's like a small like city, and they're making pretty much their daily life is based their daily life and their daily makings are based off that game, and that's fascinating. So I think you're starting to see all these interesting problems and interesting solutions come out of Southeast Asia, and also China as well, and Korea, Japan, that I to be honest, I haven't seen America figure out. And I think that's why I'm here. I think it's just way more fascinating. Although, I mean, there's some still, like I said, there's still some still cool startups that are happening in America, but I think the problems out here are way more fascinating for me personally. So
Yeah, all that nuance is amazing. I think that probably explained why some of the Western company have such a huge problem getting into the Asian market. Like
yeah,
Uber has to sell their China team to DiDi, and I know Yelp has tried to expand internationally, but have to stop that effort. So a lot of companies are definitely trying
it's
to,
hard, right? Because
yeah,
I don't think people put the effort into growth. I think, yeah, we were in a clubhouse room and people just don't think about the cultural context or the localized problems, right? And if you can't think about that in terms of how you're trying to expand, then you're going to fail.
yeah. Like I remember Chaitna in one of her talks talk about Netflix was trying to get into those emerging market, and free trial doesn't do well in Japan
Yeah.
because people think if it's free, what's wrong with it? It must not be very good. So like the freemium model that we're like learning as the Bible here in the West might not work very well in some of the Asian culture.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like that thing I mentioned, like you have to work with the governments, and Americans, for whatever reason, don't like working with other governments, from what I've seen. So
I guess for Western company out there, work with the local government
work with
more,
people. Yeah, work with
work with
people.
people. Yeah, that sounds super fascinating. I bet a lot of people after watching your talk and our conversation would be like, "Ooh, I want to work in Asia."
Oh, dude, it's
So,
so
and like
cool.
now is the pandemic where we're really encouraging a digital nomad sort of lifestyle. So I bet a lot of people are interested in maybe start working in a different country, maybe Southeast Asia. Do you have any suggestions for people who are interested in getting started? How did you do
Well,
that?
yeah. I think just connect with the right people, network with the right people as well, right? I think you need to connect and network. And I think also this is one thing I do like want to also preface, like understand people's culture before you move to a country. I think, and I've said it before earlier, it's like check your privilege at the door, because I think you really need to respect, the differences in terms of government, the rules, the regulations that happen in each country. Because you don't want to just come into a country and just like live as if you're living in America. It's not going to be like that. I think digital nomads know that, especially if you're a digital nomad for a while, you start realizing you need to just watch yourself, and check yourself, because you could be deported for stupid reasons, right? So yeah, I think there are many ways to obviously be a digital nomad. Uh, I think some of the cities that are probably best for that right now, although again, prefacing that is pandemic, right? Pre-pandemic, I can tell you like Vietnam has been growing and scaling, and there's so many opportunities there in Vietnam. I think Philippines is also a very interesting place as well, where there are up and coming startups that are also going to be probably talked about very soon in the next 3-4 years. Indonesia is a big one. I think a lot of people go to Bali though. Although I think I'm Bali fatigued. I think I don't want to tell everyone to go to Bali, because there's so many bad stories that come out of there with privileged digital nomads. So Bali is a great place, but just don't be a privileged person that goes and visits there. Thailand's amazing. I think Thailand is actually trying to open up and encourage people to actually come to Thailand. So Thailand's actually a good option right now. So yeah, I would check out those countries in general.
Yep, sounds great. I want to visit all the countries.
Yeah, come.
Yeah, yeah, I know. After the pandemic, yeah, sounds great. So, anything new that's going on with you that we should know about?
I run. Okay, so there are two things. I run a podcast actually on the intersection of technology and how it impacts culture. It's called Traces. I can send you that link. Pretty much, I've been actually talking to people from countries that you really don't hear about. So I've been my season one. has been interviewing people from Myanmar, and Myanmar obviously has been going through some tough times recently. So I've been talking to a lot of interesting people. So I've been talking to a designer, talking to engineers, talking to a humanitarian. I talked to a MMA championship fighter, which is pretty awesome as well, who's from Myanmar. And I think for me, right, it's just giving them a voice and platform. And for context, not a lot of people know, but Myanmar just got internet access in 2010, 2011. So think about all
Wow.
that information access and that access technology coming in at that point. And mind you, like I was probably like 24, 25 at that time. Think about it for anyone that like is 24, 25 at that time, and then the internet opens up. That's fascinating, right? So I've been talking to those folks in general and getting context about what's happening and how tech impacted our lives and culture. I think that's important to just talk about. So check that out. And then the other thing that I'm working on right now is I'm working on a shoe brand for Southeast Asia right now. So that's what I'm working on the side. So my goal is to make it sustainable for Southeast Asia and only for Southeast Asia, but we'll see. I think it's a very interesting problem that will be a lot of user research with fashion and shoes. So I'm looking forward to it.
That's so fascinating. I'm looking forward to see the update of both of those endeavors.
Yeah,
Um,
check out my Instagram. Yeah, like there's a video of me putting together my first shoe. So um, I put together an Air Jordan Nike. So it's pretty cool by hand. So now I'm just looking to making my second shoe, and I'm actually looking for resources online for materials that are sustainable. So there's pineapple leather I'm looking at into mushroom leather. It's crazy.
yeah, is that a separate Instagram handle or just
Yeah,
your?
so the brand's called Udara, UDARA underscore shoes. So check it out.
All right, at Udara Shoes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, how else like can the audience follow up with you on the internet?
Yeah, just reach out to me on probably Instagram is your best bet. I'm on Twitter. Um, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm sure people write to me on LinkedIn, but I get so many messages from robots on LinkedIn now that I just don't listen. So apologies if you messaged me on LinkedIn, I didn't respond. And I think Instagram or Twitter is probably the best bet. You can try to reach out to me on LinkedIn, but there are a lot of robots. So
All right, I don't experience that. I'm not as famous or interesting, I guess. Yeah, I'll make sure to include your Instagram and Twitter handle in the description in case people want to connect with you.
awesome. I miss you, Ran. It was good talking to you, bro.
Right, really great talking to you, and thank you so much for being on my humble YouTube channel.
You're
Uh,
welcome. And this one's for you.
oh, all right, thank you so much.